Hey, everybody. Welcome to another joint episode of The Bitter Pill and Jerry's Take on China. I'm Jeff Melton with The Bitter Pill here in the United States. And Jerry is over in, I forget the name of your city, Jerry, in China.
It's not easy to remember Zhongshan. It literally means middle mountain, but it's the only city certainly in southern China. There's a couple of places in northern China that's named after a person. Sun Zhongshan, who is also known as Sun Yat-sen and was the first president of China.
Oh, okay. So I've got a banner up here that hopefully you'll take a look at. Just reminding you, if you haven't subscribed to either my channel or Jerry's channel, please do so. And we would appreciate it. And also like and share this video on both channels and give us your comments so we can have a bit of a discussion here. So anyway, there were several topics that we wanted to talk about tonight. Well, basically two categories of topics. One is the issue of efforts to rescue animals who are subjected to horrifying treatment that have taken place both in China and in the United States. And the same organization, Direct Action Everywhere, based here in the United States, co-founded by a friend of mine, Wayne Hsiung, who's a civil rights lawyer and animal rights activist for most of his adult life, led a group that rescued dogs in Yulin in southern China. What is it, Yunnan province?
No, it's in Guangxi.
Okay. And also led a investigation and rescue of many, many factory farms here in the United States, where I am. And recently, he's been prosecuted several times for essentially stealing animals or this or that, where basically what they actually do is they go in and document the conditions in the farms and show that quite often animal welfare regulations are being violated by the farmers, and in any case, the conditions are such that many of the animals in these facilities get sick or injured because it's crowded and so on and so forth, and are actually not healthy enough to make it to market. So, they're not taking anything of value if they rescue those animals, which is what they do. So anyway, we'll talk about that. I forgot to mention Wayne was convicted of a felony charge centered around one of their recent animal rescue efforts here in the United States. But we'll get into that later. I just wanted to give you guys a rundown on the topics. The other main topic we're going to talk about, because of course everybody's talking about, is the Israeli-Palestine conflict, which has just been a horror show over the past couple of months, where I think officially something like 17,000 Palestinian civilians, mainly in Gaza, but also a few hundred in the West Bank in Palestine, have been killed. Anyway, we'll get to that. And also, there have been efforts, as you've probably heard, to censor people speaking out about Israel's actions in Gaza and so forth, and calling for a ceasefire. There's been people fired, people threatened, people having social media accounts taken down, and so forth. But recently, a friend of mine, or an acquaintance of mine, was kicked out of Jewish Voice for Peace, an activist group that is fighting against the Israeli onslaught in Palestine. And I thought, since it's early in the stream and we're still waiting for people to come in, that I could go ahead and just briefly touch on that, because it's not a story that will take very long. So let me just share with you what happened. Let's see, present. Okay, that visible to folks? Okay, good. So, oh, wait, this is the wrong one. Part 1 is what I want. Where did that go? Did it close? Oh, here we go. Okay, so Anne Minash is an activist who co-founded a group called Feminists in Struggle. She's been a lifelong peace and social justice activist all her adult life, and especially with regard to feminism. And she has been active in the recent controversy around the trans issue, where, as we've talked about in our discussions before, basically the issue is that there are men who say they're trans, who identify as women, who want to invade women's spaces and sports, be able to use women's bathrooms and locker rooms and play in women's and girls' sports and so forth. And so a lot of feminists, of course, are opposed to this because it violates their right to privacy and safety and fairness in the case of sports. So Anna's been active in that, and also she is active on foreign policy issues and was participating in a Jewish Voice for Peace chapter in San Diego, where she lives, and had organized an event. Like, she was a leading organizer and one of the speakers at an event that was about to take place. And just before the event was scheduled to happen, she got the following email. Hi, Anne Minash. Thanks for your contributions to our chapter over the past months. Lily and I were recently made aware of a Twitter account, or her account, and references both Jewish Voice for Peace San Diego as well as Feminists in Struggle, of which you were a co-founder, which puts the phrase transgender rights in scare quotes. We were surprised to learn of this article you apparently authored, as well as several tweets on your Twitter account which express, quote unquote, anti-trans sentiments, including to believe that you were born in the wrong body is a quasi-religious belief. And we can debate whether that's true or not, but how's that anti-trans? There is no evidence that males who identify as trans are less violent. It's just a factual statement. I'm seeing a demand that males who state they are women be included in women-only spaces and lesbian groups, that gender non-conforming kids be sterilized. JVP National and JVP San Diego both unequivocally support trans rights and trans liberation as intertwined with Palestinian liberation, et cetera, et cetera. Unfortunately, in your apparent public writings, you have implied trans rights are not a serious issue, described trans rights as trans identity as a quasi-religious belief, implied that trans women are violent, which she didn't do that. Describe trans women as males who identify as trans and males who state they're women, and associated trans people with demands that gender non-conforming kids be sterilized. These anti-trans statements are not compatible with JVP National and JVP San Diego's organizational leadership requirements, which include building space for queer and trans members that allow us for us to build community and belonging within both our identity groups and across them. For the safety of our trans members who plan to attend Thursday's action, we are asking that you do not attend this event that she organized and is a speaker at, unless you agree to engage with Lily and I on this thread in or over the phone to discuss a repair process that would involve publicly apologizing for these and any other public statements denying trans rights, which she never did, and affirming trans rights and liberation, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so they're demanding that she publicly apologize, and she responds, "I am outraged. I have nothing to apologize for. I have no hatred or bigotry toward anyone. My position on this subject has to do with the rights of women and of lesbians. You have zero understanding of my position and where I am coming from, and obviously you don't believe in democracy, discussion, and debate, or respect for a diversity of views. You can't exclude me from a public event, which was my idea to begin with. I plan to be there, etc." Okay, well, I mean, it's a kind of a long conversation, so I don't want to go through the whole thing. But what do you think, Jerry?
I think it. I mean, you and I may not necessarily agree on this one. I personally think that trans issues are not an issue. They're a non-issue. They're a created issue. I'm not saying they haven't become an issue, but they're a created issue. There is really nothing in there. I mean, I live in China and I've lived here for 20 years. When I left Australia, there was no such thing as trans issues. There was gay issues, there was gay rights, gay pride, all that kind of thing. And I just think to myself, why have people allowed themselves to be manipulated into this position? And this comes down to politics. What has democracy done for these people? In China here, everyone is protected. If you happen to be trans, you are protected the same way as if you happen to be gay or if you happen to be straight. There is no differentiation between you as a person. And China does respect each individual person, but they respect them in a communal way. If someone's going to stand up and say, I am trans and you need to respect me, they're probably going to get cut down by the police, invited to drink tea, as they call it. And then they're going to be told, look, you've got your own position in life. That's fine. You continue with that. We're not going to stop you doing that. But you've got to stop making, what's the word? Making division inside of the community. You've got to stop that because that's not the way China works. So here, I mean, I'm just getting it from a Chinese perspective. Yeah. Trans issues are not an issue. Gay issues are not an issue in China. I know many gay people. Yes, it was considered a mental disease many years ago, but so it was in the UK too and in Australia. Yes, it was illegal many years ago, but so it was in the USA. I don't know about the USA, but in the UK and in Australia several years ago. It's not anymore. They have moved with the times. So this is one aspect of it. My take on China is always about the Chinese aspect of it. There is no issue here. Yeah. My question would be, why are these people making it an issue and linking it to the mass slaughter of innocents and saying your take on something that's happening inside of, I assume this is in America, your take on something that's happening in American locker rooms is inextricably linked with our take on the mass slaughter of millions and thousands, tens of thousands. Now we're getting closer to where we can say tens of thousands. I think it's 17,000, 18,000 now.
Yeah, well, if you count the bodies buried under the rubble, it's over 20,000.
Probably, yeah, that's true.
Plus,
that's true.
I mean, people are starving to death and dying of disease. Those aren't counted in the figures on deaths from the bombing.
Ultimately, they will be. An organization like Brown's will do a cost of war on this and just say, okay, I mean, let's stay away from that and just stick with, finalize this issue. In my opinion, this is stupidity at the highest level. And I'm sorry to say that to people who are very, very adamant or very passionate about their cause. Their cause may be right. I don't care about their cause. But linking it to the death of thousands and tens of thousands of people and saying we have an equal level of importance is completely wrong. Tens of thousands of trans people. I mean, people will argue and say, yes, they're committing suicide and things like that, but they're not dying every day. You're not losing 700 or 800 people every single day. It's a very different cause. Keep the things separated.
Yeah, and Anne in her response to them makes exactly the same point. She says, I find it appalling to trivialize the concept of safety in this fashion. They said her opinion was making trans people feel unsafe, when the people who are in real danger are those in Gaza who are dying like flies. Safety is threatened by war. It is not threatened by someone having a different opinion from yours. And another great point she makes is that she points out that they're doing the exact same thing that the Zionists are doing to Jewish Voice for Peace. She says, all of this reminds me of the ADL, Anti-Defamation League, which is a ostensibly Jewish rights group that's actually just, a promoter of Israel. All this reminds me of the ADL smear that JVP is anti-Semitic and makes Jews feel unsafe. Imagine if you were thrown out of an organization or worse from your job or school, as is happening to Palestinian Israelis, based on your views, unless you apologize for your bigotry and recant it. You're doing the same to me and depriving me of any opportunity to defend myself. And of course, she hasn't said anything.
And do you know what?
In any case.
Do you know what it's doing? It's feeding the opponents of this league. There are a group of people, and they're not a cohesive group of people who are anti this Palestinian. I'm not going to call it a war, it's a slaughter. They're anti this Palestinian slaughter. Now, how do you dilute that group and make them less strong? You throw in divisive matters and you start arguments at the highest level of that group. So now we've got one organizer of one rally and the other organizers of an administrative procedure, and they're fighting with each other. Now, what will happen when one is forced out? Several of that person's followers will follow out. So now you've divided that group and you've diluted or diluted their powers. And that is exactly what their enemies and enemies maybe is too strong a word, but the people who oppose their stance will be looking at this and going, this is great. We've got exactly what we wanted here. We've divided them into two different camps now. Yeah. And that's exactly how the CIA works. They're doing it in China. They're doing it in Tibet. Tibet is in China. They're doing it in Taiwan. They're doing it in America. You've got division, and you've got pro-life and pro-choice. You've got pro-gun and anti-gun. You've got Republicans and Democrats. You literally got a completely divisive society. Yeah. And that is what they do in order to prevent you as a society from rising up against them as whatever it is that they are. You live in an oppressive regime that is constantly allowing you this much freedom, not this much freedom. And they're saying, you've got this much freedom until you go against it, and then we're going to take that bit away. So now you've only got this much freedom. And eventually all of your freedoms will be gone because they've diluted every single opposition to what they're doing to you.
Yeah, it really does seem like this is one of many things that the ruling class deliberately uses to divide us. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if there weren't plants in a lot of these
How
groups,
did those
like
two ladies who wrote to the other lady that we were recently made aware of a tweet? Who told them about that tweet? Who pointed them in the direction to say, inside of your camp, you've got someone who disagrees with you on an entirely different matter, because the Jewish peace program and the trans rights entirely different. So you've now diluted both of those. It's great strategy.
Yeah, and as we've talked about before, I don't want to get off into it, but as we've talked about before, they're not really promoting trans rights. They're just violating women's rights and pushing kids to do something that likely won't help them with their psychological problems instead of getting them good therapy. So,
well, there's also that issue it is absolutely and totally impossible to promote trans rights and protect all women's rights. It's not possible. Exactly. And of course, they're pushing this point. No one will ever agree on that. If my wife or my daughter was going to a sports club and there was a guy there getting undressed in front of either of them, I would be offended by that, and so would my wife, and so would my daughter. So, how can you protect that trans guy's rights when you're protecting my wife and my daughter's rights? You can't do the same thing. It's impossible.
Yeah, well, I mean, but it's just not a right for him to go into a women's locker room just because he says he feels like he's a girl or whatever,
or a women's prison, for that matter. and they're doing it.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So, what shall we talk about next? Shall we talk about the animal?
Sure. Let's move on to the animals.
Okay. So, as I was mentioning at the beginning of this, an activist named Wayne Hsiung was instrumental in organizing what the organization that he co-founded, Direct Action Everywhere, calls Open Rescue, which means that unlike in the past, activists would just sneak around and hide their identity and so forth, and say, look, the conditions, show video footage they've taken of the conditions in this or that factory farm and how horrible they are. What DXE is doing is, that's short for Direct Action Everywhere, sorry, is openly, without any concealment of their identity or anything, going in and investigating the conditions in these farms and rescuing animals and saying, well, look, we have a legal right to do what we're doing because these animals are in terrible condition. Animal welfare laws are being violated, and these animals that are most sick or injured are not worth anything to you anyway. You can't obviously sell an animal that's either too sick to reach market weight or whatever, or isn't going to live until slaughter time anyway. So Wayne founded this group, and they started doing animal rescues in the United States, and he's Chinese American himself. And he decided that he was going to travel to Yulin, China, where they have the Yulin Dog Meat Festival. They have farms in the area. Or
let me just put that into perspective. He didn't travel from America to Guangxi. He was studying in Northwest University, which is in Xi'an. And
no. He was a professor at Northwestern University in Chicago right. Before he founded DXE in 20.
Yeah, he was in China. He was in China anyway. I knew he was at the university. I didn't realize he was a professor, part of the faculty. I think I probably would know many people who know him. I was not personally involved, but I worked with a large group of people who were in Guangzhou. I was working for the British Council in Guangzhou in 2016, 2017, and many of my colleagues would gather together and head down to Yulin for Western protests against this Chinese festival. There's a big problem with the festival in that the festival doesn't have official recognition. Now, let's put this into a little perspective here. He was arrested in China, right, but he was never charged in China, and he's left China with at least one of the dogs that he rescued. And now, give this some perspective. He's in America, and he gets charged and convicted of doing something, and in China, he gets told, you can't do this, and you have to leave the country now because you've broken our laws. Now, I'm not going to get into the debate here about whether this is a good law or a bad law. China has now banned the sale of dog meat, but and there's I've got a link to, and I'll put the link into the description. There is a link in. It's been banned. China, the Yulin festival couldn't be banned because it wasn't actually a festival. In order to ban something, it has to exist, but it wasn't actually a festival. It didn't really exist. It wasn't an entity in itself. You can't ban something that is a tradition or a culture and say, this is an effective legal ban. You can't. You couldn't ban Christmas, for example, and stop people celebrating it. That's a fact. This is the way it is. Now, the Yulin Festival is not a recognized entity. And if it was a company, they could prosecute it. But what this is a group of people who get into this one place and they do this. So that made it very difficult for the government. Despite what people think about China, it actually follows a very strict rule of law. and the government saying, well, we can't do anything to stop this because we don't have laws for animal protection. Now, this again, it kind of relates to your trans issues, and you're linking your trans issues to your Palestinian slaughter. These two things don't go hand in hand. Now, the same thing in China. China opened itself up 45 years ago, 1979, 78, 79. And it started its path towards moderate wealth. China is still not a wealthy country, although it has some wealthy people. It is still a poor, relatively poor country. It has no more poverty. It's taken 45 years to get to that point. Now, what they've done is they've said, we need to prioritize what laws we set. There's a limit to the time, there's a limit to the ability, there's a limit to what you can do, and there's a limit to what you can do and maintain your popularity. Because if you don't maintain your popularity, you've got problems. And the Communist Party really does want to remain a popular party. It does everything it does for the majority of the people. So what it did, it waited until there was enough outcry over Yulin. 90%, probably higher, of Chinese people do not eat anything that normal meat-eating people in the West eat. Now, there used to be snake restaurants. They're not anymore. I'm told, I've never seen this, but I'm told it used to be possible to eat things like monkeys and monkeys' brains. I've never seen that. I've never heard anywhere where I could go to get that. And I've lived here now for 19, nearly 20 years. So traditionally, we eat pork, beef, lamb, lots of duck, lots of chicken. We eat the same things that meat eaters, I know you don't, Jeff, but meat eaters everywhere eat the same things that 99% of Chinese people eat 99% of the time. So even people who do eat dog don't eat dog every day. It's not that kind of thing. And what they've done now is there is no legal avenue where you can sell dog meat or cat meat. There are a list of animals, and it's a United Nations list, a list of animals that are allowed to be harvested, farmed, harvested, slaughtered for meat. There's a list of animals, and China adheres to that list. As of 2020, the eating of dog in China is not legal. That doesn't mean it doesn't happen. There are some people, and Yulin is one place. Yulin is in Guangxi. It's about 700 kilometers from here. It's not far from the very, very famous Guilin, where the beautiful rock mountains are in the beautiful river. It really is a nice place. And my wife and I cycled through there in 2020. And I can assure you, this was in April, 2 months before the ban on dog meat. And we saw dogs for sale. Dogs are for sale in that area, or they were in 2020. I would guess if they're for sale now, it's illegal. It's gone. Yeah. The market for dogs is now illegal, which makes them very expensive. And there is no avenue anywhere inside of China where you can legally farm dog meat. It's not possible anymore. That's not to say it doesn't happen. 40 years ago, I was a police officer in the UK, and there was dog fighting, cockfighting, badger baiting. There are people who do these things. They're sick people.
The famous football player in the United States, Michael Vick, was convicted and sent to prison for being involved in a dog fighting ring a number of years ago.
There you go. So, I mean, it does happen. But, I mean, I get angry when I hear and see, I see this all the time, particularly with things like COVID, where you eat bats and you eat dogs. No, Chinese people have never eaten bats.
No.
It just doesn't, it's just not a food.
It's just a racist stereotype. Both the bats and the dogs. And, of course, when Wayne was doing this rescue, it was legal, and these people could engage in their trade out in the open and so forth. But the vast majority of Chinese people even then didn't eat dogs, and of course don't now. So this is a long article, but I just wanted to share a little bit of it so I could give you a little bit of his perspective and what happened with that rescue, and then we'll talk about what's happened more recently, where he was convicted on trumped up charges related to an animal rescue here in the United States.
Mm.
So Wayne says, I'm a co-founder of the Grassroots Animal Rights Network, Direct Action Everywhere. Rescuing animals is our mission. We go to the darkest, most dangerous, and most secretive places on earth to stop violence against animals. We don't ask for permission. We simply go in, defying the law where necessary, laws against trespassing, etc., and take injured animals out. Animal rights activists call this open rescue because we publicize our actions and our faces openly to the world. As an open rescue activist, I have witnessed some of the most disturbing sights imaginable. Chickens so deprived that they are eating each other alive, piglets so crowded they are trampling one another to death, and farms that resemble evil fortresses from a sci-fi movie with their massive assembly lines of death and cases of pharmaceuticals. But even I was not emotionally prepared for what I saw in Yulin, people killing and eating dogs. And he tells a story about how when he was a little kid, his parents took him on a trip to China, and he was horrified to discover that there were dogs being sold for meat there. And so he wanted to go back there many years later and investigate the dog meat trade and rescue some. But he talks about conversation he had. Not sure if I can find. Oh, okay. So he talks to the dog meat traders, and after a bit of sort of arguing with him and trying to convince him he was legit interested in buying dog meat or buying a dog from the dog meat farm, which of course he wasn't, he was able to arrange to visit a dog farm. So he says, to him, the farmer who owned this farm that he visited, I learned as we talk, all animals are the same. Dogs and pigs, he tells me, there's no difference. At least on that, we agree. Because that's one of the points that they wanted to make is, look, pigs and cows and so on and so forth, just like dogs, are sentient beings. They have feelings. And so if they're horrifically abused, they're going to suffer both physically and emotionally. And so that's DXC's mission, is to show how this happens routinely on animal farms, even when there are animal welfare laws, which are not necessarily obeyed, and even when they are so-called humane farms, where there are somewhat stricter standards in place, but they can still do things like separate cows and their calves at a very early age, castrate pigs without anesthesia, and so on and so forth. But anyway, so after a harrowing experience where, as you mentioned, he wound up being caught and thrown in jail, and they threatened to destroy their camera equipment and video of the farm and so forth. Somehow he was able to get out and rescue 2 dogs. So fast forward to a few years and quite a few animal rescue missions later, and over the past year or two, Wayne, as well as some of the other activists in DXC, have been charged with various felonies, either felony burglary, because they say, well, you stole animals, but of course the animals had no value. So they were able to get out of a couple of cases by pointing out, well, it can't be stealing if what we're stealing is worthless to you, right? It's not really.
That's actually. Let me get back to my police training from 50 years ago, 45 years ago.
Yeah.
I don't know about in America. I don't know the American legal system. A person is guilty of theft if he dishonestly appropriates the property of another with the intention of permanently depriving the other of it. That's the definition of theft. I remember that from 1977, where I had to learn it by heart so I could recite it in an exam situation. Now, there's a few different factors in there. If you appropriate the property of another, there's no mention of value at all. So in the UK for certain, in Australia for certain, if you take something that belongs to somebody else, even if it's just a pen or a toothpick, it doesn't matter. it belongs to another person. So in theory, if you're at my kitchen table and you say, can I have a toothpick? I say, no, you can't. If you take one, you've stolen it. What's the value of that? It doesn't matter. It's still a theft under the UK and the Australian style of law. The next thing is that you need to have the permission to take something, and you need to permanently, you have the intent to permanently deprive the owner of it. So I'm going to take your dog, whether that dog has a value or not. If I take your dog and I have no intention of bringing your dog back healthy, I might take your dog. My intention is to bring it back to health, pay the vet's bills, and bring it back to you as a healthy dog. That's not a theft. But of course, Wayne's interest wasn't in doing that. It was in helping the dog, of course. And I get that. This is not me being anti what Wayne is doing. This is me just putting the law into its perspective here. If you take away something with the intention of depriving the owner of it, you are guilty of theft. If you do that as a trespasser, you are guilty of burglary. Burglary is three different things. It's theft, it's criminal damage, and believe it or not, it's rape. If you want to do one of those three things, then you can be guilty of burglary if you're a trespasser when you do them. So, you've got to, if you understand the law, you understand that Wayne is actually, if he got away with that, he was quite lucky. In China, here's the interesting thing about Wayne's situation. He stole a dog. He got away with it. He left the country and the dog left with him. So what does that tell you about our two different legal systems?
Yeah. It also helped probably that he was an American citizen. But
wouldn't make any difference. It wouldn't make a jot of difference at all. The system here, it would have been more complicated with an American, but if they were going to charge him, they'll charge him. They've charged plenty of Americans before. And I know many people who have broken laws in China and never been prosecuted for it. They call this a police state. The opposite is true. It's not a police state at all.
I can't remember whether it was in this article. I don't know if you remember or not, or somewhere else, but I read that it seemed to him that the police were on his side. So even though
now they would be. Sorry, phone call came in. Now they would be on his side because now there is a law that says you can't farm dogs. You can't sell dogs. That would mean that if he did what he did today, the police would support him. What happened in 2016, there was no law to protect him. So what they probably did, now I read the article, he was given a bit of a beating. He was arrested by the police. And you know why he was arrested? Because they can't arrest the 20 people who were beating him because there's only 4 or 5 of them. So they arrested the smallest party, and they did it for his own safety. He was never charged with anything. He was taken away. He was interviewed, and he might describe that as an interrogation. And being interviewed by a police officer inside of a Chinese police station is probably going to be a very unnerving experience for anyone. They may have thought he was Chinese at first, realized he was American, and then they said, well, look, we don't want the hassles here. The nearest American consulate is in Guangzhou, 600 kilometers away. What are we going to do with this guy? Let's give him a cup of tea, give him a stern warning, and kick him out. That's how they deal with it.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of like, in the United States, until recently, at least, it's legal in about half of the states now. But, it was often the case that if cops would catch you with a small amount of marijuana, they would basically just give you a slap on the wrist because they didn't think it should be illegal either in a lot of cases. And that's probably what happened here. They probably
for their own use too.
Yeah. And that too. But they probably thought, well, hey, I don't like people eating dogs either. And he showed them the video footage of what was happening, and they probably didn't like what they saw. So anyway, he got out of that, and fast forward to 2023, and he was put on trial for actually he's been tried 2 or 3 times in the last couple of years for these animal rescues where they go in and investigate the conditions on farms, show that they're not treating animals as advertised, and then taking animals out that are too sick to be of any value to the farm. And it has, I don't know what exactly the law says. I'm sure there are distinctions depending on what the value of the property is, but
No.
but in the United States, I mean, but in any case, obviously you've got to convince a jury that a person is guilty of a crime, and so juries have discretion to decide, well, hey, look, yeah, he might technically have stolen something, or they might technically have stolen something from these farmers, but it was of very little value, and they showed that these animals were suffering horribly, and felt sympathy for the animals, and so they acquitted Wayne in a case recently in Utah. But this recent case in Sonoma County, California, was one where they did convict him and are trying to convict some other folks. So I'll just quickly read through the press release describing the case. So animal rights activist and attorney Wayne Hsiung was sentenced to 90 days in jail, followed by 24 months of probation for his involvement in nonviolent animal rescues at 2 factory farms in Sonoma County: Sunrise Farms, a major egg producer, and Reichardt, California's largest duck farm. Judge Laura Pasaglia also ordered that Hsiung have no contact in any form with the other named co-conspirators in the case, a list including many of his closest friends and one of his co-defendants in a legal rescue trial scheduled for next March. So for 2 years, he's not allowed to talk to, for example, his best friend, who used to be his girlfriend, as well as many others who have been involved in these rescues that he's very personally close to. So it's really cruel what this judge did. Upon the verdict, Judge Pasaglia ordered that Hsiung be remanded into custody without bail while awaiting sentencing, despite the nonviolent nature of his actions. So he's denied bail, even though he's not a flight risk and he hasn't committed a violent crime. Hsiung is appealing the conviction in Sonoma based on several rulings by Judge Pasaglia that constitute prejudicial and reversible error. Attorney Chris Carraway said, "I often hear courts describe trials as a search for the truth. Mr. Hsiung's trial was anything but. The press had limited access, trial participants were unconstitutionally gagged from the beginning, and the court bent over backwards to prevent the defense from detailing the chronic animal cruelty found, which informed the intent behind the actions." The mass open rescue at Sunrise Farms was prompted by investigations that occurred in 2016 through 2018, which found that despite Proposition 2, which is an animal welfare law in California banning intensive confinement of animals on factory farms, Sunrise was confining tens of thousands of birds in towering 15-foot tall rows of tightly packed cages, inside of which many birds were sick, dying, and dead. And they found other violations of animal welfare laws too. The point is that these farms are violating animal welfare laws right and left, and as well as even if they weren't violating any, the animals.
I have two questions. Questions. First question is: are the farms being prosecuted for their offenses? That's the first question. And the second question is: does the judge need to be elected to that position? I know there are 38 states where judges need to be elected. If the judge needs to be elected, a supplementary question: are these farms donors to the judge? Now, even if they're not, this shows you how corrupt your American system can be.
Yeah.
If that judge is seeking re-election and he is favoring, Wayne is a guy with he's got a cause, but he's not a rich guy. Whereas the company, the corporations that are manufacturing is not the right word. They're selling eggs that the chickens are manufacturing, or they're selling chicken meat or whatever it is that they're selling. Now, when you get into that kind of situation, you've really got to look at it. Needs an investigative journalist to go one step beyond this, and this is where his lawyers should be bringing this up. Judge, can you tell me, is this corporation that is suing my client or is prosecuting my client one of your donors? Now, surely that, in a country like America, should be transparent. If it's not, then you have a serious problem.
Well, I don't know all the details, but yeah, I mean, this judge is very corrupt. He's got a lot of links to animal agribusiness in the area.
There you go. There you go.
But yeah, what I was saying is that, instead of prosecuting the agribusiness companies for violating all these animal welfare laws, which they were, of course, DXC, filed criminal complaints about these violations. The authorities did nothing about that. Instead, they went after Wayne and his colleagues involved in these rescues. Originally, this was back in 2018 when the rescue took place. Originally, about 100 people were arrested and charged with felonies. Either they took a plea bargain or they were acquitted or whatnot. And, anyway. But yeah, they're having the book thrown at them for trying to save animals, to document animal cruelty. And meanwhile, the producers, the farmers, if you want to call them that, and their companies are getting off scot-free for violating
let's
the law.
Call them what they are. Let's not try and be polite. They're corporate criminals.
Right. Yeah.
That's what they are.
Yeah. Or as I forgot who coined this, but animal harmers instead of animal farmers.
It's not a bad one. Yeah, could have been a mistype. The F and the H are very close to each other. But that's a good one. Yeah. Animal harmers, not farmers. But when they're doing this, they're corporate criminals. When they're committing crimes in order to profit from those crimes, and someone or some law is broken. If I'm a producer of orange juice and I produce this in orange juice and it should be up to there, but I only give you to there, and I do that for 1 million glasses of orange juice, then I'm a corporate criminal. And I'm saving, even if I'm only saving 10 milliliters, I'm saving a hell of a lot of money if I'm selling 1 million of them, or 10 million or 100 million. So that's a corporate crime. It may be kind of marginal. Who cares? But when you start adding that up, that's massively criminal. And this is what they're doing. You start thinking about how these animals are treated, and it breaches every law that they've got. That's something.
Yeah, I mean, it's not just violating animal welfare regulations, but it's also, when the animals are so packed together on these factory farms, they have to shoot them full of a ton of antibiotics to keep them from keep them alive, keep them from getting sick, and that eventually causes antibiotic resistance, which becomes a very big health problem.
Can I give you another Chinese example, another take on China here? Colombia, the country Colombia, has recently just signed a deal that took 12 years to make. And the deal was that Colombia are now selling beef into China. And it's a good deal for China because the beef is good quality beef. And it's a good deal for Colombia because they have a lot of cattle and they have a big market for it. Now, this is all good, but it's taken 12 years. Why did it take 12 years? Why did Australia have trouble with the lobster that they were sending to China? I don't know if you know this story. Every Australian will know this. It's been all over Australian media for 5 years. 5 years ago, Chinese government suddenly said, we're not taking any imports of lobsters from Australia anymore. And the reason was they test the product when it arrives here. They need to have certification when they arrive here. One of the tests is a veterinarial residue. So any medicine that is given to the people, to the animals, and if the animal is then slaughtered and there is any residue above certain limits, then that needs to be taken back and it can't be sold into China. This is what China does. It's protecting its people by protecting its imports. And it really was interesting to me to find this out, because I never realized this. I just assumed that because you can go to the market here and it's a bit of a free-for-all. You can actually, in some parts of China, you can see animals being killed in the market, and that's because the people want fresh meat. I don't like it. I'm a meat eater. I'm not a vegan or vegetarian, but I don't want to look my animal in the eye when it's killed. And that's a fact that most Westerners don't want. We go to the marketplace and we see meat and we buy meat, or we go to the supermarket and we see meat is nicely packaged and we buy that meat. But in China, you can go, I want that chicken. And they pull the chicken out, cut its throat. But now, just after COVID, that is now illegal. Can't do that since COVID. So since 2020, all the laws have changed. All the meat is slaughtered before it comes to the market. Now, the problem with that is that some people are saying, well, how fresh is it? I don't know when it was killed. And that's a fact, because they're sold in an open market. It might be a closed market, but what we call a wet market. So that's causing a little bit of problem. But China is very, very strict on what ends up in our tables, in our dishes. Very strict. And that's something that really most people in the West wouldn't understand. They assume that China is kind of this dirty, filthy place. It's absolutely not. It's completely the opposite. They are very, very strict. Now, you just talked about the injections. Chickens get an injection of hormones and all kinds of things into the back of their neck. If they tried to export that chicken to China without doing the tests for veterinarial residue, then they wouldn't get an import license or export license to come to China. And that's something that most people wouldn't understand or realize. It's been in law for a long time. It takes many years for any country to achieve an export license for livestock or for product of livestock to get into China. Something the Americans seem, if you've got this antibiotic resistance because your farmers are pumping, because they have no choice, they're pumping full of antibiotics and hormones to make them grow bigger. I don't know if you've tasted chicken. You've never been to China, and you probably wouldn't have tasted chicken anyway. But chicken in China tastes so much better than chicken in Australia. I don't know about America, certainly in the UK. And it's much smaller. There's less meat. It's because it's not injected with hormones to make it grow. 45 days later, they're cutting its throat and doing what they do to animals and packaging them. But in China, they don't do that. They just allow the animal to grow naturally.
Yeah. Well, there's always things that are harmful, both potentially to human health and, of course, the health of the animals and to the environment. Like, you have these massive factory farms with all these animals concentrated in one place, and they don't do anything with the waste. And as you probably know, of course, raising cattle or other ruminants on the massive scale that we do in the West is a major contributor to climate change, because of the methane emissions from the cow's breath due to their digestive process, and also due to all the land that has to be cleared to create grazing pasture for them and to grow animal feed for them as well as other animals. So it's a really overlooked contributor to environmental problems. That's really major. But very little of this is regulated, or if it is regulated in the United States, the regulations aren't enforced, because, as you know, this is just a very corrupt country where in one industry after another, certainly including agribusiness, the U.S. government is captured by corporations, and they do corporations bidding. And so that's why you have these horrific situations that Wayne and others active in DXE have documented, and other animal rights groups have documented here in the U.S.
Your corporations, any legislation that you have is going to favor the corporations, because the corporations, possibly one of the most evil corporations in the world is your biggest agribusiness in the world's Monsanto. Look what they've been doing for the last 40, 50 years, or maybe a little less than that. But since Donald Rumsfeld was in the administration, he changed the way that US eats. and basically created your obesity problem because no sugar, because they got cornstarch coming in. That's better. It's not better at all. Or corn fructose, I think it's called, not cornstarch.
High fructose corn syrup. Yeah.
There you go. You know more about that than me, but that's a fact. Your corporations have basically created an unhealthy society. Forget about the
I mean, even as a vegan, at times I struggle with my weight because I used to eat products that had, the corn syrup or sugar, and I cut out anything with sugar basically, unless I go out. So that's helped a lot.
Australia's the same. I mean, I can remember taking my grandkids to McDonald's in Australia and standing in a queue behind two people. And I swear I couldn't see round them without moving a meter. Both of them were the same. You want to see round them, you've got to, whoa, look at the size of this person.
Or their body's blocking most of the aisle and their grocery cart's blocking the rest of the aisle. It's like,
I actually thought that these were unusual. And then we went to sit down at a table, and just about, you couldn't sit at some of the tables because they're full of a person. That was it. One person who takes a whole table, and they're uncomfortable sitting on chairs, so they have to sit on benches because they're hanging off either side of the chair. And I mean, I'm overweight. I struggle with my weight when I'm not exercising, when I'm not riding my bike. I struggle with my weight. I put on weight. I drink beer, which is sugar as well. But when I go back to Australia, people look at me and go, "Oh, you're looking good, mate. How are you going? You lost some weight?" No, I haven't. I put on weight. I'm 100 kilos, but they're 120, 130, 140. It really is a very sad situation. And I've no doubt America is as bad as. And some of the Pacific Island nations really have an obesity problem that is huge. And forgive the pun, but their obesity problem is huge.
Yeah, for sure. Well, ideally, if you eat, a healthy plant-based diet and you cut out both the, processed food, the oil and sugar, and the fat from, at least the higher fat animal products, you will lose weight if you're overweight. I mean,
I also get on my bike and I ride to the next city, spend the night there, and ride home again the next day. Things like that.
That helps.
Yeah, that helps.
I run about 5 or 6 miles a day, so keeps me going. But let me just. Where did that go?
Is Wayne allowed to talk to you?
Yeah, he's allowed to talk to me. I haven't been involved in any of the animal rescues, so.
Ask him if he remembers the people from the British Council in Guangzhou. Many of them were friends of mine, and it was, I think it's June. It's the midsummer, 21st of June is the Yulin Dog Festival, 20th or 21st of June. And they used to hire vans and vehicles and go down there and do dog rescues and things. And there was always in their groups, there was always, anybody want a dog kind of thing. Not really.
Yeah.
Very hard for
a cat, not for meat.
Yeah, no, but not for meat. That's right. But in the job that we were doing, it was very difficult to have a pet because we're constantly traveling, all of us.
Yeah.
But Yulin, I've been to Yulin. I've seen dogs there. There's stories that I mean, I haven't been to the farms, but I have seen dogs being mistreated in the streets. But we're going back several years, and my understanding, I haven't been back to Yulin since the law was changed, but my understanding is that it's gone underground. It's almost non-existent now. Traditional Guanxi culture, yes, Anonymous. Traditions can be changed, though, and need to be. They really need to be. And I think one of the problems in China
fighting used to be a tradition too, right? So
bullfighting as well, things like that. One of the problems in China is that there is no animal welfare protection laws. We have laws to protect humans in China, and they just say, well, why do we need to protect animals? They're not one of us, that kind of thing. There's still many things about China that you find that a little surprising, but it's basically a case of development. They're always a little bit behind because they've come. 1949 they started, then they had 20 years or 25 years of chaos, And then suddenly they started to get things right in 79 with Deng Xiaoping. Now, I'm not saying that Mao did everything wrong, but he did some things wrong. And he created a foundation of the country that we've got now. So he's very highly regarded. But then Deng Xiaoping was the one who put it in place, and then things can start happening. And as the country develops, Mao banned dog. I don't think Mao banned it. I think he discouraged it. Dog meat has never been illegal until 2020, but certainly it was not something that is on the menu. You don't go to a restaurant and say, "Oh, I fancy dog today." It doesn't happen. You go to a restaurant that specializes in dog meat, or you used to. Now you can't, at least not legally. I'm fairly certain if I wanted to find dog meat, I could find it, but it would be illegal. I'd be breaking the law. The person selling it to me would be breaking the law. The person who sold it to the restaurant would be breaking the law. That's the difference now. So, it's still going to happen, I'm sure.
Yeah. But I mean, we have animal welfare laws in the United States, but either they're not enforced or they don't really do that much. So, for example, you can still castrate or debeak castrate an animal or debeak a bird, which they do because they keep them in such crowded conditions that they peck each other, right? And you can do those things without any anesthesia, so it creates horrible pain for the animal, but they're allowed to do it even in California, which supposedly has the strictest animal welfare laws, although, as we've been discussing, they're not really enforced very well. And of course, the standards are different for pets, quote unquote, like dogs or cats, and for farm animals, quote unquote.
I'm just another little aspect of what's happened to Wayne. You talked about these. He used the word draconian, the draconian probation rules or conditions that he's got to live by for the next 2 years, or for I don't know if it's the next 2 years. I'm not sure when his conviction was, but certainly for 2 years, he has these draconian conditions.
Right.
And again, for a take on China, this is exactly what America is accusing China of, this social credit score. They are doing everything that China is accused of, everything America accuses China of. They accuse them because they know it happens inside of their own backyard. It's happening in America that you have people who are living on these conditions that would be described, if they were in China, they would be described as horrific. Yet this is an American legal system that has put one of its own citizens into this horrific state of hiatus where he can't do what he needs to do. This is the social credit score that they accuse China of having, which China doesn't have. China has a legal system whereby you can be blacklisted if you haven't paid your debt, if you've committed a crime and you're pending court cases. They don't lock you up all the time while they're investigating things, while they're preparing things. They let you out and say, well, you can't travel, you can't stay in hotels, you can't get train tickets, those sorts of things. You can't leave the country. This is normal. This is a bail condition. This is quite normal legal system and no different. But America is actually doing what they're accusing China of doing again.
Yeah, and it's exactly what Israel does as well. Everything they accuse Palestinians of, they do themselves, and either the Palestinians don't do them at all, such as in the case of where they're accused of using civilians as human shields. There's never been a recorded instance of that happening at all, but Israel does it routinely.
There's 2 million
if they do
people.
it, like certainly there have been cases where Palestinians have deliberately killed Israeli civilians, but Israel does it on a much vaster scale.
Yeah, there are 2 million people living in a few square miles of a strip we call Gaza, of the strip called Gaza. 2 million people. Now, there is a movement inside of that area of freedom fighters. How can they possibly hide in there without human shields. This is not using human shields. This is the place is so crowded that they must be in the same regions. 2 million people living in a place that's not much bigger than a United States shopping mall.
Yeah, about the size of maybe New York City.
It's only it's very, very small, a few square miles.
Yeah,
2 million people live there. It's not the size of New York
20
City.
miles
It might
by
be the
5
size
miles.
of Manhattan Island. It's not the
A
size
little
of New
bigger than
York City.
Manhattan, but it's not very big.
Yeah,
not much bigger than Manhattan. But I don't know how much time you have, Jerry. We've gone for a little over an hour now.
yeah, it's all right. Yeah, we're going to move on to. Are we going to move on to talk about?
Yeah. I thought in the interest of time we could move on to that, and hopefully I can get Wayne on for an interview at some point. I know he's very busy, but he should be out of jail due to time served real soon. So definitely we'll have to talk to him.
Yeah, good idea.
Yeah. I saw you had a tweet about the Palestinian situation recently, Jerry, that really captured something important that's been going on. So recently in
What did I
Israel,
say? What did I say?
Oh, let's see. I thought I had it called up. It didn't add to stage. There we go. Sorry, forgot to add it to the stage. You said, some will say Stockholm Syndrome, but I think this might actually be an eye-opening moment for a lot of people. We're not hearing horror stories of maltreatment from Jews being released, but we are from Palestinians. Torture, abuse, broken bones, starvation. Also, I might add rape and sexual assault and harassment. Hamas didn't do that, as far as we know. None of the Israeli captives suffered.
Well, you can be assured if any one of those Israeli captives came out and said, I was raped, I was beaten, it would be all over the media. But what are we seeing there? We're seeing smiles, handshakes, sometimes hugs and sometimes kisses. We're seeing people who have cared for the people that they took. That was the point I was making there.
Yeah, exactly.
And then when we're seeing the other side, there you go, praying as well. When we're seeing the other side, people are being released with broken bones. They're talking of deprivation. They're talking of starvation. They're talking, yes, you mentioned rape. I haven't seen that, but sexual assaults, yes. Torture, psychological torture, for sure. All of those things are happening inside of Israeli prisons. And yet you've got these, I don't know how many dozens have been released, but certainly I think they took 130 and several dozen have already been released. And not one of them has come out with a horror story.
Yeah. And, on the Palestinian side, I think there were a couple hundred released and 300 were on the list to be released. I don't know if they all were. Well over 200 of them, something like 230, were in prison without even having been charged with anything. The people that were released. And the majority of them were children.
Yeah. I saw one of them was taken when they were 8 or 9 and released at 17.
Yeah.
How do you take an 8 or 9-year-old and put that person in prison? Where's that kid's school gone? Where's that kid's education? The only education he's got is probably how to hate the people who locked him up.
Exactly.
I think it was a girl, actually. How to hate the people who locked her up. In prison for 9 years for throwing a stone.
Yeah, or not even that sometimes. A lot of people don't know what they're in prison for because they're not charged with anything. They weren't told of any charges. Even if they are charged with anything and it goes to trial, it's like a kangaroo court, kind of like what Wayne Hsiung went through, but maybe worse even. And they just lock them up however long they want. And I read a report recently from a human rights group that said that something like 95% of the children that are put in Israeli prisons are, or say they were tortured. Just torturing children. It's unbelievable.
Yeah. When you say 95%, it always sounds terrible when it's almost 100% of them, but I wonder what the number is. I'll give you an example of how percentages can be used to misinform us. Now, I'm not suggesting it's not a horrible situation. I'm just giving you an example of how sometimes percentages can be misinforming. And recently there was a news article in America that the number of Chinese illegal migrants crossing the border has increased by 15,000%. 15,000%. And I did some research on it, and I found that it had gone from 7 to 24,000 or something like that. 7 people crossed 1 year and 24,000 crossed another year. Now, what happened in China during that period of time didn't happen in China. It happened in Hong Kong, which, yes, is China, but it was the Hong Kong riots that caused people to leave. And they were rejected from going into Taiwan. Now, here's a strange thing. If you're a Chinese person and you want to go to America, buy a plane ticket and get a visa. You can do that. It's very, very simple. If you are a Chinese person who has broken the law, then China says, we're going to take your passport or we're not going to let you in. Yeah, there it is. We're not going to let you in. So 20,000 people have left. They call it China. I call it Hong Kong. And they've traveled to America to try and get into America because America promised them. And then suddenly this massive amount, yeah, I agree, October 7 is fishy. This massive amount of people who've come to America hoping to get some kind of sanctuary from laws they've broken in China are being recorded as 15,000% increase. Yet it's 0.00002%. It's 4 zeros before you get to the number of the. In fact, it's 1.8. 0.00018% of the people crossing the border are of Chinese ethnicity. And we don't know where they come from. Taiwan, they could come from Malaysia or Singapore. They could come from anywhere. So, yeah, it's a really interesting use of statistics to show a number that is terrible. Now, when you show that 95%, my first thought now, because I've been watching and reading US media, 95% of what? So if 7 people are arrested and 8 people are arrested and 7 of them were tortured, you've got your 95%, haven't you?
Yeah, okay, but it's more like hundreds.
That's what I wanted to know. Yeah.
So there's been one story after another about October 7th that, as Anonymous suggests, seems fishy. So it started out with the claim that 40 Jewish babies were beheaded by Hamas. And that
some of them were baked in an oven as well, apparently.
Huh?
Some of them were baked in an oven or something like that.
There was a claim that one was baked in an oven, but it turns out, only one child under the age of 4 was killed on October 7th, and it sounds like probably that child, as well as hundreds of the other casualties, were killed either via crossfire or through Israeli bombardment of one sort or another, tank shells or drones or helicopter gunships or missiles, because Israel has this policy called the Hannibal Directive that basically and originally it was applied in situations involving military captives, but it seems like they apply it to civilian captives too. But basically, their thinking is that they would rather kill their own than allow people to be taken hostages and then used as bargaining tools. And of course, a primary objective of the October 7th raid by Hamas and various other groups was to take hostages, primarily military, but apparently they took some civilians too. And the purpose of that was because there were many times as many prisoners being held in Israeli jails, Palestinian prisoners being held in Israeli jails, often under trumped up or non-existent charges. And so they had to do this to be able to bargain for the release of Palestinian prisoners, basically political prisoners unjustly detained by Israel. But anyway, so another claim that was made back then, right after October 7th, but not pushed that hard at the time, I guess, although somewhat, was this claim that Hamas fighters engaged in mass rape of women. Now, the curious thing about this story is that no actual women reported having been raped. And that's still the case today, when there's been a renewed propaganda effort to push this mass rape claim, because all their other propaganda ploys, like saying that Hamas had a military base under Al-Shifa Hospital, which turned out to be completely made up. So they turned back to this, and there's been just wall to wall in Western media. I don't know how much of that you've heard about where you are, but they're just really, really pushing this hard.
I hear about it. Excuse me. I hear about it because I read Western media. Chinese media is not covering this very much at all. The only thing Chinese media is covering is the calls for peace, the calls to end this. Chinese media is very, very strict about conflict. They don't sensationalize news. That's as simple as that. And they're very strict about how they manage news. And that may be a criticism of people do criticize, but the fact is, I switch on Twitter and I'm seeing babies, I'm seeing children, I'm seeing women, I'm seeing people in death. And what China says is we don't really need to show that. So it's not really in social media. If you put it onto Weibo or if you put it onto Douyin or one of the things, they will take it down. It's as simple as that. They don't want that kind of media, but they will leave stuff up if it's spoken support of. I mean, if you support Hamas, you'll be taken down. If you support Israel, you'll be taken down. If you support peace, you'll be left there. Simple as that. That's how they do it here. So, I get to see it because I'm on Western media. If I was just on Chinese media, my wife hasn't seen very much of it because she doesn't bother going onto Western media. You can access CNN and things like that from here without a VPN if you want to. So people do, but not many.
Yeah. Well, since we're not on Chinese media, I'll just say it, although I don't obviously support any occasion where innocent people are deliberately targeted by whoever. I do think that, Hamas and the other armed groups have every right to resist the Israeli occupation through armed struggle. And that's what they're doing. And I support they're doing that because I don't see any other way they're going to gain their freedom every time they peacefully protest. They're smashed by Israel. So,
So so far, they've killed 17,000 people, and I believe they have not yet killed any single Hamas leader. They have not killed any great number of Hamas.
No.
So why are there 17,000 people being slaughtered?
Well, I mean, it kind of gives you a clue when they do all that, carpet bombing in the north, clearly targeted at, apartment buildings and neighborhoods and hospitals and schools and refugee camps and so on. And so then when people flee their homes for, refugee camps or hospitals or other, like UN facilities or whatever, they get bombed there too. And they tell them, we'll go to the south because we're, fighting Hamas, quote unquote, in the north. So they go to the south and they bomb them there too. And now the Israeli military operation has moved to the south for the
Yeah.
most part, and they're not letting people go back north. They'll kill them if they try to do that. They're stuck. They have nowhere to go. So, I mean, put two and two together, and it's pretty clear they're trying to engage in a mass slaughter of
It's an
innocent
ethnic
people.
cleansing. It's worse than what happened in the former Yugoslavia here. This is an ethnic cleansing. It's horrific.
Yeah.
I mean, there's no justification. Yeah, the October the 7th is not justification for what's happening. It can't be. You can't just say, oh, they did something terrible, so let's do something terrible back and accept that as justification. It's not.
Yeah.
You can't do this.
Yeah, and by the way, that I'll share this article on the screen in the description, and a number of other articles that I've shown, because we don't have time to go through them all. But basically, this just points out, there's this big propaganda push that is very tied to the Israeli government. There's this pretense that these are like independent women's organizations and so forth, but it turns out they have connections to the Israeli government, and they're making these claims about how they have these reams and reams. Testimony after testimony was the headline in one of the articles of mass rape, and in the article, no testimony whatsoever was presented from anyone, and the testimonies that they do have are from alleged third-party eyewitnesses, not from any women themselves, and they didn't collect any forensic evidence. They made the excuse that, well, we're just busy identifying bodies, we can't do that. So they have basically little to no evidence.
No.
But
what's happened in the United States, where your government has just passed a law that says anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism are the same thing?
Yeah.
Can we talk about that? Because I'm a little confused by that.
Basically, I mean, there was one resolution that said something that was a little bit, you're not explicitly saying that, but basically, I forget the exact wording, but it was almost saying that. And then just the other day, a resolution passed. It was, I think there were like, about 100 votes either against, or like 15 votes against, and 90 abstentions or something. But it passed. The majority of Congress voted for it. So, literally equating anti-Zionism with anti-Semitism. We're saying that.
So if I call for peace, does that make me anti-Semitic?
Well, you'll definitely get accused of it. But I guess it's, if you say you're against the government of Israel, you think that the current government of Israel needs to be gotten rid of, then that makes you an anti-Semite.
Well, wasn't Netanyahu just about to be gotten rid of before this happened? Anonymous is just, let me just put this up. I'm 100% in agreement with this. It was a false flag, but not necessarily a false flag. That's perhaps the wrong word. It was definitely a feint. It was a ruse. It was allowed to happen. I mean, there is no way on earth they let this happen without knowing. It was either the most catastrophic failure, or it was intended to happen. And why was it intended to happen? For a bigger picture.
Well, that's certainly a possibility. I think it's also a distinct possibility that they were just too cocky, and there was some information to suggest that they were planning and training for something like this. But it may have been a case of they didn't take Hamas's or the other group's military capabilities that seriously. They didn't, even if it, like, there was a report in the New York Times claiming that they got access to a written document that laid out all of Hamas's plans, which I'm a little suspicious of that claim. But even if they had this, thinking that Hamas intended to do this and thinking that they had the capacity to pull it off were two different things.
Yeah.
and even Hamas didn't, in their wildest dreams, think that they would be as successful as they did. I mean, they just obliterated the divisions of the Israeli military that were in the area and captured one after another settlement, which, by the way, if anybody watching this doesn't know, the settlements around Gaza are not like Ma and Pa and Haim and Yael, tilling the farm or whatever. These are, in fact, military installations, and the people on the kibbutz may not be formally in the military. They may be reserves, and they may or may not be armed, but lots of them are. Just like the Azov battalion in Ukraine was not part of the military until recently, but they certainly were. You wouldn't call them civilians. They were an armed group terrorizing people. And that's what the settlers in Israel do. And the settlers in the settlements around Gaza are part of the security system that keeps Gazans locked in there. They can't leave. So they're kind of in this gray area between military and civilian, I guess you could say.
So how many people in Israel actually serve in the military, and until what age? I think almost everyone does.
Yeah, I mean, there's certain people that can get an exemption, like Orthodox Jews can get an exemption, but basically I think it's well over 95%. I don't know an exact figure.
So most of the targets then are not civilian targets, if that's the case.
Yeah. So like, the people that were killed on October 7th, the Israelis, I should say, that were killed, because there were also a few hundred Palestinians killed, were, hi, Mark. Seems odd that prior to October 7th, they'd not have enough information to know an attack like this would occur. But then shortly afterwards, they'd have detailed information about Hamas positions in Gaza. Yes, very good point. They claim to have all this intelligence, such as that there was this Hamas base under Al-Shifa Hospital, which turned out to be complete bullshit. And just the other day,
another interesting little expose of that, because it turned out that Israel built it.
Right, Israel
knew
built
it was there because they built it.
And the room that they claimed Hamas was storing weapons in, it was a room with an MRI machine in it, which obviously you wouldn't store things with huge amounts of metal in a room with an MRI machine. So the whole thing was just a complete farce. But also, I wanted to mention, just the other day, there was an attack by Hamas fighters on an Israeli position in Gaza, where they had this, I don't know what you'd call it, a bunch of military equipment and vehicles and soldiers in the desert in an encampment that they thought was secure. And turned out that Hamas knew where it was. And not only did they attack it from outside, but they put out this video that showed Hamas fighters coming up out of their tunnels, with periscope or whatever, to look inside this encampment. They had an exit from their tunnel literally inside the Israeli position and attacked them from there.
Wow.
So they were like 50 feet away from them, undetected, and just slaughtered them. So yeah, Israel is not as good either militarily or in terms of their intelligence capabilities as they like to claim.
It's very interesting. Again, I'm going to put a China slant on this. The Israeli army and the American military are working hand in glove here in terms of equipment, in terms of intelligence, in terms of supplies. They're working very closely together.
There are
They've just lost in Ukraine
on the ground in Gaza as well.
Yeah, but they've just lost in Ukraine. I mean, there's no question about that now. It's only a question of signing the dotted line. But and then they're going to move on to China, and here they are with the massive failures of everything they've attempted so far, and they think they can take China. It's a well-known fact that China is the largest land army in the world. It's also built the biggest navy, and I'm not sure if it's the largest air force yet, but it certainly has in terms of ship numbers, not in terms of tonnage, but in terms of ship numbers, it has the largest navy. It has hypersonics. It has 5G, and it has 5.5G, which the US doesn't yet have, at least not globally throughout their systems, whereas in China, 5G is global. It's everywhere. There is nowhere, even my phone, if I travel to the most remote part of China, I can still get 5G. So we in China are so much more advanced, and yet they think that China is the threat. And they think that if China is a threat, they think that they can defeat this.
It's ridiculous because I mean they're not even going to be able to. Yeah, they're not even like Israel with full backing from the U.S. Like over 10 billions in additional weapons supplies just recently passed. They're not going to be able to beat Hamas.
No,
I guarantee you, Israel is not going to win this.
No, and neither is Ukraine going to win theirs. And
Right.
Afghanistan have already won theirs. The Korean one is still going on, as it hasn't been won. The Vietnamese won theirs. When was the last time the United States actually won a war? The only one they've actually won on their own, and they even got help from the French, was their own civil war.
Yeah.
That's the last time they won a war. Maybe the Philippines, the Spanish, the American-Spanish War, so where they took the Philippines back took them from the Spanish. But we're talking 100 and something years ago since they last won a war. They didn't win the Second World War on their own. The Russians pretty much did that. The Brits were in there, but would have lost had the Americans not joined in.
And the Chinese also did a lot in World War II.
Well, Chinese, they were occupied by the Japanese, and I mean, Chinese did not attack another country even then. So they didn't take this. China didn't take this as a world war. They defended themselves against the Japanese.
They were part of the Allies, and they played a major role in tying up Japanese forces.
This is a good point. I've forgotten this one. They defeated the Native Americans.
Oh, yeah, well.
Custer and his cavalry, but even Custer got killed and lost that. The Battle of the Little Bighorn is glorified as it was a loss.
Yeah.
Then they're not very good. They don't have a history of winning.
Yeah, very true. Yeah, well, I mean, like people who are defending their own homeland just have so much more at stake.
To fight for. Yeah. And this is the thing with China's Navy, China's military. They are the People's Liberation Army, People's Liberation Army Navy, and the People's Liberation Army Air Force. They belong to the people. The people in China love them. They're so high. To get into the military is the greatest honor in somebody's family. You get it. My son's joining the army. Wow, that's fantastic. This is a huge honor when your child is selected to join the army in China. It is a huge thing. There is no shame. Like in America, there's shame involved in people who were in Vietnam. They were shamed when they came back. But in China, people say, well, thank you for your service, but they don't mean anything. Basically, the American military have been used to pillage the rest of the world.
Yep.
Testimony of an Israeli captain. Oh, this is interesting.
Yeah. We sat in tunnels terrified that it wasn't Hamas, but the Israeli military who would kill us. A testimony from a released captive who was held in Gaza reveals that they were more worried about being killed by the Israeli military than the Palestinians.
Yeah.
During that period, Israel's bombing killed tens of Israeli captives in Gaza. I think I heard a figure of about 50 Israelis being held captive in Gaza who were killed by their own government's bombs.
Wow.
And
of course, that's Hamas's fault, they'll say.
Yeah. Hamas.
None of that would have happened. Yeah. I mean, Hamas, why did Hamas suddenly decide on October the 7th to attack? Is it because the same way? Why did Putin suddenly decide to invade Ukraine? They don't do this in a vacuum. They do this for a reason.
For all that we're told by the mainstream and the Israeli government and so forth, they just did it because they like to kill Jews. And it's like, really? They're not in an open air prison. They're not having their one of their holiest sites. If they're Muslim, being desecrated, and they're threatening to demolish Al-Aqsa Mosque and build a synagogue there. And they're, like if you look at a map of the West Bank now, it's like there's these little teeny dots, which is where Palestinians still have places they can live, and the rest is occupied by. I think there's something like 700,000 Israeli settlers there now. And of course, they're getting arrested and imprisoned and tortured if they show any signs of resistance, or even if they just feel like arresting somebody that day. Women are raped in prison, and just on and on and on. And
it's interesting. I'd like to. I think there'll be books written about this in the future, and how this doesn't happen in a vacuum. Putin didn't invade in a vacuum, and then you've got this kind of very interesting situation where America says, "Well, Afghanistan is a threat to us, so let's go and invade that."
Yeah.
What the hell threat did Afghanistan pose to the United States of America? It's a country mired in poverty. It's a country that had incredible social problems with religious freedoms and things like that. It's a country that was not going to plan an invasion of the United States. It served no purpose to invade. Vietnam was the same. It's a country that was divided between communists and non-communists. Where does America get the threat? And the same thing with China. They keep saying China. I saw Gina Raimondo.
It's so reminiscent of what Hitler and the Nazis said. What was it? Czechoslovakia is a dagger at the heart of Germany, or whatever the turn of phrase was.
At least it was a neighboring country. I mean, it was near enough that it could have been a threat. How can Vietnam? How can Afghanistan?
Iraq even Nicaragua. Back in the 80s, Reagan was like, "Well, wherever Texas is only 1,000 miles from Nicaragua, they're right on our border." This country of 3 million.
And look at the threat that China is creating. They call it a listening post and it's my understanding is it's a communication center inside of Cuba. So of course everything that China does in Cuba now will be a military threat. That's one of the big things. It just doesn't matter what China wants to help the Solomon Islands build a port so that the Solomon Islands can import and export stuff and lift their people out of poverty. There's a military threat to America. What's this guy saying?
Oh, this is Israeli-American spy Jonathan Pollard, who stole military secrets from the U.S. and got in trouble for it, I guess. But he's saying that the Israeli hostages and their families better keep their mouths shut and not talk about what life was like when they were held captive, because Israel and their supporters are afraid that they might say things like, "Well, they treated us fairly well," whereas they're trying to also stop Palestinians who come out of their prisons from talking about their experience. They know they're going to say, "Hey, I was tortured, and so was everybody else."
Didn't they shoot someone for celebrating being released?
Yes.
Yeah. It was part of the deal. There would be no celebrations, so we shot him.
Yeah. Oh,
what?
They're all speaking of that, like hardly anything other than just keeping to the letter of the prisoner release and releasing X number of prisoners as per the agreement. But in every other respect, Israel violated the terms of the agreement. They were shooting at people in Gaza, trying to get back to their homes and recover some of their stuff for find relatives or whatever. So they were being shot at for trying to do that. Some of them were killed. They were arresting new people as they were releasing the people that they had agreed to release, and just several other they were doing aerial surveillance over Gaza, even though they were supposed to not do that as part of the ceasefire. Like, there was hardly any aspect of the agreement that they kept.
Right. And then I saw headlines that accused Hamas of breaching the ceasefire.
Yeah. Another example. Whatever we accuse you of, we probably did it even worse, or maybe you didn't do it at all, but we sure did it.
Yeah. Well, we're hitting an hour and 40 minutes. I think it might be time to kind of wind up. And so, do we have anything to wind up on today?
Well, hopefully, I will put a lot of links to the articles we've talked about, and since she's given me permission, I'll put up a transcript of the conversation Anne had with the idiots who booted her out of Jewish Voice for Peace. There should be a petition going around about that you'll be able to sign. So when I find out about that, I'll put information about that up. But if I could just ask everybody who's watching or watches this later to, sorry, I meant to do the one that was had your channel in it too.
That's okay.
Everybody, please subscribe to our channels, The Bitter Pill and Jerry's Take on China 799. If you haven't already, like and share the video on both channels. I would also appreciate it because it's been kind of, I think that YouTube doesn't share it with people when you say you're going to live or something, because I get much lower view counts on live streams, generally speaking, than I do on recorded videos, even including the ones I do with you that wind up getting thousands of views. I only get like 30 or 40 sometimes on my channel.
I've noticed something here that I noticed about half an hour ago, that this is not streaming to my channel, and that might account for why it's a lower count there. I'm not sure why that happened, but hey, it's happened.
I think there's people watching on your channel, because I don't typically get 3 or 4 people saying they're viewing it live on StreamYard anytime. So I'm guessing that some of those are yours. But if everybody who's watching this could please, if you haven't watched on my channel, view at least some of it on my channel, so it boosts my view count. And also, if you have viewed it on my channel, go to Jerry's channel and watch some of it on his channel, so you can boost his view count as well. And one way or another, we are going to get the YouTube algorithms to work in our favor and boost our channels, because we both have things to say that I think a lot of people are interested in. So we'd like for people to know that we exist.
Yeah, there's no question in my mind something strange is going on YouTube. I found people contacting me and saying, hey, I was following you and now I'm not. I get comments that come in 2 weeks, 3 weeks, and even 1 month later than the comment was made, it suddenly appears in my feed. There's a comment here from a month ago. Where does that come from? And then I've got a lot of people saying, I put comments on yours and they disappear. They're not there. I'm not allowed to post onto your timeline. So I'm not sure what's going on. There's definitely something.
What I found is that anytime I post anything with a link in it, YouTube automatically deletes it.
Yeah, unless it's a YouTube link, because they don't want you leaving the channel.
Yeah, unless it's a YouTube link. Or, if it's your channel, you can post any link you want. But
in the description you can. But yeah, not in the comments. All right. Well, it's going to be time for me to go and prepare coffee for my lovely wife, and it's now 9:45 in the morning.
All right. Well, 8:45 here, so I guess there's something I should probably be doing for bedtime.
Going to bed. All right. Yeah. Well, I'll catch up with you in about a month's time, and we'll have some more topics. But hopefully by then there will be peace in the Middle East. There will be peace in Europe, but there'll probably be threats in China by then.
Yeah. Well, at least fingers crossed, maybe the Ukraine thing will be winding down. I'm not sure. It's going to take a while.
I think that'll be over before Christmas.
Situation.
My view is that will be over before Christmas.
Yeah. It sounds like it's winding down.
I think we're going to wake up one morning and just find, oh, it's done now, it's finished. And you know, why didn't that happen 500,000 dead people ago?
Yeah, no kidding. It's like, you know, what a waste of life.
Yeah.
I mean,
And several million displaced persons. Why did that have to happen? It beggars belief. So we're gonna hope for a more peaceful Christmas. It isn't gonna happen.
Yeah.
Good night, and good morning, Mark. That's it. Good night, good morning. Hedging his bets. Yeah. All right. So
Mark, by the way, is the person who's there in Hong Kong, right next to you.
Oh, hi, Mark.
My
right.
business partner.
Yeah, I'm only a 90-minute ferry ride from Hong Kong in Zhongshan.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, yeah, we'll see you guys. Well, I and Jerry will individually talk to our listeners before then, but we conjointly will see you guys in about a month's time, and I'm sure there will be lots of interesting things happening in the world to talk about. So
early in the new year, and happy New Year and Merry Christmas to everybody that we don't catch up with.
Yes. All right.
So long, Christmas guys. Is not banned in China, by the way. We have Christmas here. They just don't celebrate it very much. There's 100 million Christians in China.